And maybe I can share the screen with the meeting minutes. Right, so yeah, welcome to the first Streamzy community meeting. Maybe we can start with some introduction of everyone. So my name is Jakub Scholz. I work for Red Hat, mostly on Streamzy and Apache Kafka. And I'm one of the maintainers of the Streamzy project. Many of you might also know me from Slack and issues and so on. Jakub, do you want to go next? Just to make it easy, we have many Jakubs here.
Okay, so my name is Jakub Stejskal. I'm one of the maintainers too. I'm the youngest one here. And I'm working for Red Hat as quality engineer, as part of Streamzy team and Kafka team. Do we have Paolo and Tom here or not?
Let me check.
No. They're not here.
No.
Okay, so guess back to you.
So anyone from the attendees who wants to introduce himself, or should we just proceed with the agenda? Okay, then let's first start with any questions or issues as an open forum. If anyone from the people attending has something he wants to discuss, then maybe let's start with that. And if nobody has anything, then maybe we can move over to discuss the open PRs. So let me find the PRs from the list. Right, so the first PR we want to discuss is 2713. So this is from Marco, and it's about building the Streamzy in a Docker image and having that part of the hacking guide and so on. So it seems to be open for quite some time, and the question is if you think that this is any useful and should be merged and should be used, or if we don't think this is useful and it should be just closed.
Why is has to be in an image and not just in a README on GitHub?
So the idea the whole idea is that you will have a Docker image where you will be able to build Strimzi without having to install all different tools into it. So you will basically just run the image and use it to kind of build and test Strimzi with kind. So you will run this Docker command basically, which maps the files into the Docker image from your local computer, and then you can basically build everything from there. So that's why it's not just a README, but why it's an actual container image.
How much of a pain will that be to maintain over time?
I think the problem is that it wouldn't be that painful. If we are updating some tools, we need to update them also on the CI builds and so on. But I think the point is that we need to use this somewhere, or to kind of use this regularly to make some sense of it. Otherwise, it will kind of get outdated and will not work anymore and so on. And it will not have much value if everyone who wants to use it has to always ask us to update it here and there and so on. So that's why I think it's quite important to have someone be interested in it, who's working with Strimzi for a lot of time, and who would be able to kind of use it regularly, so that we can keep track whether it still works, whether it's up to date, how it works, and so on.
Does it make sense to use it in Azure pipelines or in Travis, for example, to avoid installing all of the needed software?
That's an interesting question. I think for building that, it wouldn't be that complicated to use it in the CI. I'm not sure, for example, how well would it combine with Minikube to use with, so the kind which I think Marco is using this with, it works quite nicely with that, but that's quite limited in respect to what it can do. It cannot do any node ports, it cannot do any load balancers and so on. So I'm not sure, for example, how that would be useful or useless. Also, actually in the regular builds, we don't run any system tests today. For the building, it might be okay if we can push it into the right registry from there, I guess.
Yeah, I think we can use it for building the project and the images, and then run a system test just as another part of the pipeline as we do it now.
So you would actually use it in Azure in the system test pipeline?
Yeah, maybe.
Okay, so will you take a look at it then?
Yeah, okay.
this is just a random idea, a random note. We've now got 3 hacking documents if we include this one. I think there's a hacking on Mac OS as well. In the root of the repo, does it make sense to stick these in a folder?
I don't think there's a hacking macOS, but there's the hacking MD, there's the dev quick start MD, dev quick start macOS,
dev quick start Mac OS,
and
yeah.
then there's this hacking CLI image in this PR.
Yeah,
and
So
we also have testing MD.
yeah. So I'm just wondering if it makes sense to put these all in a contributing folder or something.
Does it actually make sense to have these in the different files? To be honest, I often end up when someone on Slack asks how to build something and so on, I often end up that I anyway kind of send them links to all of these.
Yeah. I mean, I'd also like to reiterate my hatred of the word hacking for this document. I think it would be better to be just called like developer or, you know, dev or whatever, dev tips or something. But anyway, yeah, I just wanted to say, like, we've got quite a few of these files now, so either combine them into one or putting them in a folder probably makes sense.
Yeah, I don't think the things which are really covered here are necessarily hacking, right? That's more the standard build stuff, really. So what were the others? Dev quick start. Okay, I think that's a reasonable idea.
I'll try and put a PR together for that.
Okay, thanks. Okay, so I guess that might be it for the 2.7.13. Does anyone have anything else? Okay, then let's move to the next one, 2.9.7.3, which is about adding a prefix to the secrets created by the user operator so that they don't necessarily conflict with some other secrets which might follow the same kind of naming pattern, so that you can kind of make sure, for example, that they have some unique prefix in your cluster. So my view is that first of all, I think I would have a lot of comments to this PR in terms of missing tests and so on, but or that this should be maybe some constant somewhere, but I didn't want it to raise them before it was actually clear whether this is something we want or don't want to support. So yeah, I guess the main question is whether this is something what we want to have in and what we want to have supported, because once we merge it, we might need to take care of it and make sure it works and so on. So anyone has any opinions about this?
I certainly have no objection to more flexibility in the naming of secrets. I can see that people sometimes have problems with the sort of fixed naming convention that we've got at the moment.
So would we make it configurable only for the standalone user operator or also for the user operator deployed with the Kafka resource?
I mean, why not both? I think, you know, it would be bizarre to do it for one and not the other.
Okay, so anyone else has anything? Okay, so I guess we should review it and point out the missing things such as tests. I guess might be handy to have some system tests as well. And documentation. Anything else?
Maybe I have one idea.
Yeah.
As far as I know, in system test, we currently get secrets by username. So in case there will be some prefix, we should have some kind of some method in API model, for example, as we have in or as we have for Kafka, Kafka Connect, and other resources, which will return the secret name based on the username.
I don't know how it would be helpful in this context. So basically right now, the secret is always the username, right? And after this will be implemented, the secret will be always possibly some either the username if you don't use this feature, or it would be some prefix and whatever underscore or dash and the username. But the API module will not really know the prefix, right? So that will not actually be able to give you that automatically, right? You can have there a method which will kind of, you pass it the prefix and it will give you the secret. What might be maybe more valuable is, I'm not sure 100% if we have it in the Kafka user status today, but we can have there in the status, we can add the name of the secret there so that you can kind of get the secret from the status.
Yeah, okay. Makes sense.
Okay, anyone, anything else to this? Okay, then I guess we can move to the next one, which is about some change to the Prometheus configuration file. But so I think we ended up Standa asking almost 3 weeks ago some questions. Why is it needed? I tried to get the feedback by pinging the PR, but I think the current state is that we actually don't understand what exactly the issue is and why is it a problem. So it probably doesn't make sense to merge this or.
Yeah, there is still no answers from this biohazard host guy, so I'm not sure what we should do with this because, as I mentioned in this comment, this property which he is adding is optional, so it should have no effect in Prometheus deployment.
And we don't even really know the versions of the things he's using and so on. So it's kind of hard to test it with the version he's using and so on.
Especially he's adding just a property with no value, so
Yeah.
it doesn't make much sense for me.
I have a more general question about that. In case we have some pull requests with people who don't reply for 3 weeks or 1 month, do we have a policy to close this PR, or we are just waiting forever for their answers?
That's why I added it to the agenda, right? So that we can say, okay, we don't know exactly, don't understand the PR, and we didn't got any answers from the person who opened it. So I would suggest that unless someone understands that we should just close it.
So it was open 3 weeks ago, right? 21 days ago.
Yeah.
So yeah, I agree to close that one.
Is it worth adding something to the contributing file? Just saying, like, if you open a PR and you haven't heard anything, come to one of the community meetings to raise it or raise it. But if it hasn't been, if we ask you a question and, it hasn't been shown any activity, just so people know.
I'm not sure. I wouldn't overestimate how many people actually read these documents, to be honest.
Oh no, I absolutely agree with you. But it's just when someone gets angry, going, "I can't believe you closed my PR." It's like, well, if you'd read the documentation.
I don't know. I don't mind if we have it there.
Yeah, you can open a PR, Tom, right?
Yeah, I'm messing around with all that anyway, so yeah.
Okay, so should we close this then? Anyone against it? Okay, then let's not. Okay, so next one is 3037, which is about adding the JAS configuration file or string to the secret for the users who are using Scrum SHA authentication. To be honest, I actually was initially quite conservative about that because it seems like kind of easy thing to do on your own without any kind. It just really just stitching the string together, so you don't really need some special skills or special tools for that. And obviously, if you add it to the secret, then what if in one of the next Java versions the string changed or something like that? But I guess the situation where it might be useful is if you just want to pass all your Kafka client options through the properties through some environment variables, which are automatically converted to the client configuration. And in like I know, for example, the Apicurio schema registry on Quarkus is using kind of that way to configure the clients. And there it can be super useful if you can get it directly already prepared and you don't need to have any special scripts creating the right environment variable and so on. So maybe it can be useful, and it seems to be like something what's fairly easy to maintain because it's really just one more string in the secret.
Yeah, to be honest, I think that that's useful as we added, for example, the stores for the certificates in order to allow people to create the stores, and now we have the key store and the trust store in secrets. I guess that even the JAS string is something useful. So +1 from me. I guess that we should ping the guy on the PR to fix the conflicts and the DCO and see if he is still interested in merging the PR.
Are we okay with the JAS_config as the key in the secret for it?
I would avoid the underscore, having something like camel case.
Or should we more follow something like the Kafka property name, which is, I think, sassl.jas.config?
Yeah, that could be another way. Well, I have not strong opinion because somehow we are mixing these two different ways to set properties, right? Sometimes we use the camel case, some other times we use the Kafka way, using the dot as a separator.
Well, I think in the secret it's mostly files now, right? So I guess the password is just the password and the rest is files with file names. So what do we want to use there so that we don't discuss it later on the PR? Do we want to use the Kafka property name then, or what's in the PR right now, or without the underscore?
I am fine with both. Of course, not the current one with the underscore. So let's see what the other think.
So if we did this, then I can kind of see what the advantage is. But it means that whoever is consuming this still has to know that they're using Scrum SHA authentication. And they're going to have to set a bunch of other configs in their consumer in order to achieve that. I don't know exactly where I'm going with this, but it would kind of be nice if you could just consume this and not actually care whether it was Scrum or TLS authentication. Now, there's lots of things that make that hard to do, but the question I'm kind of asking, initially at least, is this just the one config that we want to set in here, or might there in future be other configs that we want to set in here as well?
I think you always need the knowledge of the authentication, because, for example, for TLS and certificates, you have to mount the certificate as a file, because the Kafka client, at least in Java, takes the path on the file system, and so on. So I don't think this can be really done without any knowledge whatsoever.
Yeah, that was the complication I was referring to. But I mean, you could imagine people wanting to do stuff with config providers, for instance, so that they were accessing the secret directly rather than through a mount, perhaps. That maybe Word makes sense. I don't know. I'm just thinking aloud that why are we just, are we going to go down the path of just having this one config, or in the future might we actually want to supply more things?
I don't know. I'm not sure what else would you want to supply there.
Okay, well, I can certainly go along with this for now. I'll have a think.
So I mean, in theory, you can, for example, have a field for a SASL mechanism, but you would still, for example, need to be able to configure a security protocol yourself, because with a Scrum user, the user secret doesn't know whether you will be using SSL encryption or not using SSL encryption, and so on. So you will always stop somewhere. You can't really feed the client just based on this. Okay, anything else to 3037? Okay, so then we have these two PRs, which are actually duplicating each other, and they are both about the structural schema. So I guess the question is whether we want to have both of them open there. And what do we actually want to do with the structural schema? So one of the new information which we got, I think, in this PR was that actually in from OpenShift 3.11 188, the structural schema seems to work fine. And I managed to test that, or to actually use for the test files generated mostly by the other PR. But it seemed to work fine there, but it still doesn't work on Kubernetes 1.11. And it also doesn't work on the older OpenShift 3.11 versions. So I guess the question is, and maybe the problem is too complicated to decide on it right now, but at least we should try to think about it and have some plan for it. So whether we, for example, want to say that we drop the support for Kubernetes 1.11 and for older OpenShift 3.11 and support only the newer versions with the CRDs and then merge in one of these PRs. What I would a bit wonder there is what the actual added value of that is, because as far as I know, the main real advantage right now of having the structural schema in the V1 Beta 1 CRDs is that in OpenShift 4 UI console, you have this kind of schema guidance when creating the custom resources, but I'm not sure what other practical things there are. And then I think the other thing to think about is that sooner or later we will need to add support for the V1 CRDs, which, so the plan to drop the support for the V1 Beta 1 was moved from Kubernetes 1.19 to 1.22, but it's basically what, 9 months in the future. So the question is whether it doesn't make more sense to add support for actually generating the V1 CRDs in addition to the V1 Beta 1 and keep the V1 Beta 1 without the structural schema for the time being, which would allow us to kind of support 1.11 without any issues. And on the newer versions based on Kubernetes 1.16 and newer, people can use the newer V1 resources, and those will then have the structural schema and so on. What I did as a test is that the operator builds, they seem to be fine with using the CRDs V1. So there were no issues with that. So in theory, we can, for example, have 2 folders with the installation files, one with the older CRDs, one with the new CRDs, and the users can choose depending on the version where they are.
So would we also duplicate the Helm install, for instance?
I think that would get quite messy if we duplicate everything. So I think for the things like the Helm, we should then kind of choose which one we do, or maybe actually with the Helm, it can be done with some switch, whether it installs this version or that version from single Helm chart. I don't know.
And what would be the approach for testing? Would we be trying to test both, presumably?
I guess if we would have both there, we would have to, at least to some extent, test both of them.
And in documentation where we've got fragments of, I suppose it doesn't matter actually, does it, in documentation? Yeah, okay, forget that one.
So in the documentation, it will kind of, I think, mostly affect the installation part, right? Where you might need to mention that, yeah, you should install this on these versions, that on that versions, and so on.
In any case, I think I agree with you. I think we're kind of going to have to be able to generate both.
So to be honest, I don't know, maybe in, let's say 6 months, the situation will be different and we will be fine to say, let's switch to CRD v1 fully and support Kubernetes 1.16 plus, right? And have only one set of them. I think that's fine. I think that's an option as well, how to go. Then the other question would be if it makes sense to kind of think about these structural schemas for the old CRDs and doing things like dropping support for Kubernetes 1.11, or whether we should simply then wait, for example, for the 6 months with the current CRDs and just then migrate to the new ones completely or something like that.
I think the supporting people on 1.16 plus is quite hostile, because I think a lot of people who are using Strimzi aren't keeping up with the rate of Kubernetes version changes. So I think it would be a mistake to follow a policy whereby we were only supporting CRD v1. Obviously, I think the situation is slightly different when it comes to Kubernetes 1.11, which is getting really quite long in the tooth now. So, yeah, I think that's a bit more of a difficult decision.
So
I think we need to at least support CRD v1 and extensions for the foreseeable future.
You mean the v1 beta one?
Yeah, but that's in the extensions group, isn't it?
I think the v1 is in the extensions as well.
Okay, okay.
It's just the version which is changing.
Fine. But yeah, you take my point.
So how long do you think we should support that?
Well, that's a broader question than what we want to do right now for the structural schema.
Well, I think it's, to be honest, a bit connected, right? Because I think it might not make sense to change the things now and then change them again in 2 months and so on, maybe. And as I said, so if we have now, let's say, 6 to 9 months to support the v1, I would agree that saying today that Kubernetes 1.16 is not the good choice or and higher, because we are too early. But then if you would be somewhere around Kubernetes 1.21 as the latest release, then 1.16 will be kind of 5 releases back. So I guess it would look a bit different, right? So I guess, at least for me, it will be kind of interesting to understand how long do we want to support the v1 beta 1. And if it's something where we can imagine dropping that in 6 months, for example, maybe we should just live with them for the 6 months and then drop them and replace them. And maybe if we think that the v1 beta 1 should be supported for, I don't know, 1 year, 2 years, regardless the Kubernetes 1.11 and so on, then yeah, maybe we can just start working on the CRD v1 support today and don't have to wait for another 6 months.
Yeah, I mean, it's now me who's asking the broader question, but by that, what I was referring to very obliquely was more to do with the fact that at the moment we don't have any described sort of support policy around, you know, which versions of Kubernetes we're going to support. So I think it's very difficult for users to come to Strimzi and make informed decisions about, you know, how they're going to use it or how well it fits with their organization, for example, because, you know, we're not sort of saying that we are, or we're not saying that we're not going to support any particular version of Kubernetes or version range or anything like that. So we, at the moment, yes, we work on 1.11, but that, you know, they can't plan, and we can't help them with that at the moment because we have no articulated description to say, look, you know, we're going to drop support in this sort of time frame. What I think would be more beneficial would be for us to have some statement somewhere to say, look, we're going to, you know, cover this number of upstream Kubernetes release, and then from that point on, you know, we're prepared to drop features in versions of Strimzi. Does that make sense? Can you see the point I'm making there, Jakub?
I can and cannot, or let's say I can see the point you are making, but I don't think it's easy one to make because if what you promise is not in sync with what the Kubernetes project promise, then I think you expose yourself to not keeping that promise. For example, because APIs will be removed and so on. And the Kubernetes promise, I think, is to support the last 3 minor releases, which realistically is probably not enough to cover all the users. But I'm not sure whether I would kind of commit myself to support more than that when the Kubernetes project doesn't do that.
Well, if the policy is not going to be some sort of blanket thing based on upstream Kubernetes, I think we need to be able to tell people, you know, sort of quite ahead of time when we're going to, you know, what our plans are around, you know, versions of Kubernetes, whether that's just simply a blog post or something.
Which is, yeah, I think that's reasonable.
We could also include something in the Strimzi release notes for the next version. If we're planning on dropping anything in a future version.
Right, but for that we need to have an idea. What do we plan to do and how do we plan to do it, right?
Yep.
Which, as I said, so for example, if we say that we now wait for another 6 months with the current V1 Beta 1 resources, and then we move fully to V1 and support only Kubernetes 1.16 plus, then that's maybe something what we can announce today. And yeah, I mean, ultimately I'm trying to a bit kind of plan the work, so to say, because if we want to support, if we really think that we should support this V1 beta 1 for long enough to need to support it in parallel to the V1 version, then at the end, that's something what someone can be already working on to add the V1 support, and the users on the newer versions can use it, and they can use the structural schema and so on. And if we are not planning it and we will really switch from one to another without supporting both of them, then yeah, maybe we should start thinking about announcing these things and so on. So maybe that's something what we can think about for the next community meeting, what everyone thinks we should do and how long we should support which things and so on. Does that sound reasonable to everyone?
Yep, sounds good to me.
Okay, I hope that captures pretty much what we discussed. So I think we are almost out of time. So last chance for any questions for the last 2 minutes. Okay, then I guess we are finished for today.
Thanks, folks.
So we have the recording, and I think the plan is to